In 2015, the film The Great Raid was released by Miramax. It was about the 6th Ranger Battalion of the U.S. Army and their attempt to rescue prisoners of war at the POW camp in Cabanatuan, Nueva Ecija. The movie featured known artists such as Benjamin Bratt, who played as a cop in Miss Congeniality, James Franco for his role as a frenemy in Spider-Man, Connie Nielsen starred as Lucilia in Gladiator, and Joseph Fiennes, who was Martin Luther in Luther. The movie was filmed not in the Philippines but in Australia. But today, we are at the Cabanatuan American Memorial. Oh yes, and I forgot. The movie also featured Filipino actor Cesar Montano. And before I continue further, the movie and this video will not be best told if it were not for the book of Hampton Sides, The Ghost Soldiers. And behind me is the West Point Memorial, Duty, Honor, and Country of those who came from West Point and perished their lives here at the Cabanatuan American Memorial. This list comes from the class of 1903 all the way to the class of 1941. By January 9, 1945, the United States 6th Army, led by General Walter Kruger, finally set foot on Luzon in Lingayen. But 2 days before, in the island Morotai in Dutch Indies, which we now call Indonesia, Private First Class Eugene Nielsen had a story to tell to G2, the U.S. intelligence branch. He and 5 other former prisoners of war were narrating their horrific experience to Captain X of G2 about the massacre that happened at the POW camp in Puerto Princesa, Palawan last December. On January 26, while in his headquarters in Calasiao, Pangasinan, General Kruger was briefed by another G2 officer, Horton White, who in turn was briefed the day before by Major Robert Lapham. White told Kruger that Lapham was an American guerrilla who hid from the Imperial Japanese Army after the fall of Bataan. Lapham's concern was that in his area in Nueva Ecija is where a POW camp is, the biggest in the Philippines. He was worried that another massacre like that in Palawan will befall those in Cabanatuan. Making matters worse is that ironically, the nearer the Americans came to Cabanatuan, the likelihood that a massacre will be higher. No further amount of convincing was needed by General Kruger. It was just a question of when and who. By the 29th of January, the 6th Army would be in or near Cabanatuan. Thus, a rescue must be attempted by that date. It was White who suggested the man for the job, Lieutenant Colonel Henry Musey. Musey was the commanding officer of the 6th Ranger Battalion, the only Ranger Battalion in the Pacific Theater. It was patterned after the British Commandos, except that the 6 Rangers had not faced any real action. Musey, a graduate of West Point, a survivor of Pearl Harbor attack, was called by his own men as Little MacArthur, not only for his pipe that he smoked, but also for his motivational style that included salesmanship and public relation gimmicks, something you will get to know more later. Upon learning the once-in-a-lifetime mission, Musey assigned it to Ranger C Company, headed by Stanford graduate, the 25-year-old Captain Robert Prince. If Musey was flamboyant, Prince was not only aptly named, but was the cool, methodical planner much needed for this unorthodox operation. A platoon from F Company was then attached to C Company. Musi then asked that those who had doubts about the mission to drop out. No one did. Musi preferred single men because of the extreme danger, but that did not deter them either. Musi's last qualification was no atheist on this trip, as he wanted each to go see the chaplain and swear an oath to the Almighty that you'd die fighting rather than let any harm come to those prisoners. After leaving Calasiao on trucks and jeeps, the 120-man group made a stop in Dagupan. Added to them were 4 more soldiers: Robert Lautman, Wilbur Gore, Frank Gotsheimer, led by Lieutenant John Judecke, who brought an arsenal not of weapons but of heavy photographic gear. They were from the 832nd Signal Service Battalion. This was Musi's idea of PR. So upon reaching the fringes of the 6th Army in Gimba, Nueva Ecija, the motley crew disembarked to begin their bivouac with 2 Filipino guerrillas to serve as guides. In Lobong, Nawa Barangay in Pangasinan, they were met by Captain Eduardo Hoson and his band of Filipino guerrillas. The Rangers needed the Filipinos for their intimate knowledge of the terrain, which rivers to cross, and most important, where the Japanese were at. Thus, some 80 guerrillas formed the right and left flank of the Rangers, as well as serving as their rear guards. Next stop was the village of Balingkarin, 8 kilometers north of the camp. This was the same place where a few weeks earlier was attacked by the Japanese, wherein locals died for their support of the guerrillas. From there, it was only an hour's march south to Platero, which was close to the POW camp. This is another marker here at the Cabanatuan American Memorial. Allow me to read it for you. Defenders of Bataan and Corregidor Incorporated. The soldiers' trust. The soldiers of freedom who perished in this POW camp laid down their arms and left their fate in the hand of their captors, with the trust that they would be treated according to the pledge made by civilized nations at the Geneva Convention. History reveals the trust of those who perished here was betrayed. This memorial symbolizes the determination of Filipino and American soldiery to defend freedom. This marking is so much touching to me because my father served in World War II and he survived. In support of the Rangers were a reconnaissance team from the legendary Alamo Scouts, composed of First Lieutenant Bill Nellist and First Lieutenant Tom Ronceville. But they brought bad news, as they haven't finished their job. And making matters worse was the presence of about 200 elite Japanese Army troops from the Dokuhu 359 Battalion under Tomeo Oyahu, complete with armored vehicles and tanks, on the other side of the Cabo River, about a mile away from the POW camp. Mucci made another Filipino guerrilla head, Captain Juan Pajota, a member of the Filipino 91st Infantry when war broke out. His territory covered Balingkarin, Platero, and the POW camp. When Pajota asked when the rescue will be made, Mucci muttered, "Tonight." Pajota replied, "Sir, with all due respect, that's a suicide." Pajota explained to Mucci that the plan was okay, but the timing sucks, as a convoy of enemy troops and equipment would pass by the camp while the raid was ongoing. Pajota recommended a 24-hour delay. Pajota also solved Mucci's problems of how to transport the sick POWs by Carabao carts. Upon reaching Platero, Mucci realized of Pahota's prediction of a large enemy convoy was indeed true, and defying radio silence, informed headquarters of a 24-hour delay. This also gave the Alamo Scouts time to view the POW camp up close. At this time too, the Scouts were joined by Private Rufo Vaquillar, a Filipino American who replaced his uniform for farmer clothes and walked limping in front of the camp because his rifle was hidden in his pants. Nellis joined him at an abandoned nipa hut with a full view of the camp. 3 more Alamo Scouts arrived: Franklin Fox, Harold Hard, and Gilbert Cox. They were ordered to bring back to Mutsi what they gathered about the size of the camp, the location, the number of enemy, and where the prisoners were. Later that day, Nellis and Vaquillar were shocked to find a Filipina walking to the camp and talking to the Japanese guards. They were afraid she was an informer and would warn them of the American attack. But after she left, everything seemed normal at the camp. Added to the intelligence information came from Pahota, which in turn came from his spy, a Filipina, the same one Nellis and Vaquillar worried about. Finally, the master plan of Prince came to be. Pahota's men would cover the bridge on Cabo River against the Imperial Japanese Army soldiers and tanks of Oahu. They would also plant a time bomb to blow up the bridge at 7:45 to prevent troops and vehicles to cross. Hoson was on the opposite side, blocking off the highway for any reinforcement by the enemy from Cabanatuan City. The Rangers would flank the camp by 7:30, fire at will. The only problem left to solve was the distance from the forest where the Rangers were hidden to get anywhere near the camp. It was a long, flat expanse with no place to hide. Once again, Captain Pahota provided the solution. Have an army plane to fly near the camp to distract the Japanese. While the Japanese were looking up, the Rangers would crawl until they can get cover of darkness once the sun sets. And as if on cue, a P-61 Black Widow from the 547th Night Fighter Squadron began its flyby over the POW camp. 26-year-old pilot Captain Kenneth Schreiber with radar specialist First Lieutenant Bonnie Rocks made it appear that the plane was having engine trouble and losing altitude while encircling the camp. The 20-minute diversion by the plane gave the Rangers enough time to crawl near the camp. At the same time, Lieutenant Colonel Stombo with Captain Hoson's guerrillas cut the phone lines to and from Cabanatuan. Just after 7:40 p.m., Lieutenant John Murphy made the first shot, signaling every Ranger to fire heavily. It rattled not only the enemy, but even the prisoners, who thought the Japanese were shooting at them. Sergeant Teddy Richardson ran to the camp gate, tried to open it with the butt of his machine gun, but could not. He used his pistol to shoot at the padlock, but a lucky shot from the Japanese hit the pistol of Richardson's hand and gun fell on the ground. He used his machine gun to fire back, hitting the enemy, grabbing his pistol again, and this time disabled the padlock and the gate opened for the Rangers behind him to enter the camp. Another Ranger with a bazooka, Manton Stewart, headed for the metal shack where a Japanese tank was suspected. Firing some rounds, he disabled a tank and a truck. 5 minutes after the first shot was fired, the bomb exploded on the bridge and it was partially destroyed. This started another firefight, this time between the Filipinos, led by Pahota, and the Imperial Japanese Army, led by Ohio. Unable to cross the destroyed bridge with vehicles, the Imperial Japanese Army charged by foot and they were massacred by the guerrillas. As the Rangers now reached the prisoners, some of which were in disbelief and reluctant to point that they thought it was a trick by the Japanese to get them killed. Though some were convinced it was a real rescue, some had to be forced, and even Colonel Duckworth, the American commander of the prisoners, refused until a Ranger grabbed his arm and said, "General MacArthur is in charge here. You're not." By 8:15 p.m., the raid was over, All except one of the prisoners were brought to the safety where the Carabao carts were at the Pampanga River. 2 Rangers perished, ironically, one of which was the raiding team's doctor, Captain Jimmy Fisher, who was hit by a mortar shrapnel. The American doctors who were former POWs, Dr. Masoman and Dr. Ott, assisted by Filipino doctors Carlos and Julita Layog, did their best to save Dr. Fisher. 2 freed prisoners also did not make it due to poor health. 20 of Pahota's guerrillas were injured, as were 2 scouts and 2 rangers. Past 8 a.m. the next day, the convoy of rangers and freed prisoners were provided air cover by American P-51 Mustang fighter planes. Soon, ambulances and trucks appeared as they reached the outskirts of the friendly front line in Talavera, Nueva Ecija. By the way, there was one Englishman who had vision problems and was picked up by Filipino guerrillas who saw him at the front gate. This was Mr. Edwin Rose. "489 prisoners of war were liberated, along with 33 civilians. This included 492 Americans, 23 British, 3 Dutch, 2 Norwegians, 1 Canadian, and 1 Filipino. This started a series of great raids.
Hi everyone, this is Maria Ozawa. Please watch the fabulous historical YouTube page called WaW Philippines World at War, and I am excited to be shooting with them very soon. Bye!